Well, salutations again, dear viewers. It is unfortunate that I wasn't able to get to this a long time ago, but I am willing to go out there for Metroid because I do enjoy these games tremendously. Now, the problem, such that it is that pretty much every Metroid game has caused me increasing technical issues. I went through 3 recordings of Super Metroid before I got one that I could use. That was because of technical issues, and this game, admittedly, it's a skill issue. Now, I'm sorry for talking over the lore dump back here, but trust me, there's going to be plenty of that coming up. This, by the way, is post-recording, because of part of that technical issue. So, while Samus outlines the fact that she was infected by X-parasites and so forth and so on, again, the text scroll is slow for this entire video. I'm gonna probably speed up the in-game text scroll for my next recording, because I had to record this in bits, which, when it's a timed thing, I don't like doing, because if you botch the timing at some point, it all falls apart. But yeah, I had a guide that I created a long time ago. Well, create is a strong word. It was cobbled together from a bunch of different informationals and so forth. Other people made the guide. I just edited it into expanded in places and padded down in others' format so that I could use it during an actual play session to find out where I was supposed to go and what I was supposed to do. So I played this game through to completion following that guide to make sure that I got 100%. I also tried for the completion time, but if I had gotten that, you'd be watching that footage edited and cut rather than this new footage. So I had to edit that to cut out all the times I had to like pause and read the guide. And so that I could have it play in the background while I was playing the game for recording. Now, the trouble that manifested itself was that I wasn't able to record audio at the time, and I might not be able to record audio again for this game. So this whole experience might be a whole post-audio recording. Yeah, people didn't like the fusion suit when it was introduced. At all. I question, because, the suit's color palette changed by the end of this game. When she gets the Varia and then the gravity suit, and yet, when we see her in Metroid Dread, the suit's more mechanical components have inexplicably regenerated, but it retains this kind of blue on yellow color scheme, which wasn't how she finished Fusion. I had the impression that the reason why this was blue was because this was actually a mutation of her Zero suit. Because when she dies in this game and her power suit breaks apart, she's wearing her undersuit, basically her, sports underwear, not her Zero suit, so this is basically a Zero suit amped up on steroids, not actually her proper armor. This is one of the games where Samus is most vulnerable, but she's also most agile. That, however, can create problems, like, the timing on the power bombs is such that you can't, not power bombs, the morph ball bombs. You can't actually chain bombs to gain high altitude. You can't also, wall jump up the same wall either, because Samus gets too much air coming off of it. So a lot of the sequence breaking tricks just don't work in Fusion. It's one of many reasons why a lot of people don't like this installment. Now, one thing you'll notice straight away is that, this video, in terms of game time on the game's clock, which doesn't count these, cutscenes or text boxes, was 11 minutes. You may have noticed the video timestamp is 34 minutes, which highlights how much this game front-loads its exposition. It's less or so at the end, and I think that's another reason why people weren't big on it, because, again, Metroid games are all about environmental storytelling, not somebody explaining things to you, like we have right now with the ship's computer, or SC explaining everything to us. Thing is, there's a reason why this was set up the way it was, because this was a portable console game. This was for the Game Boy Advance. So was Metroid Zero Mission, which, as I understand it, was derived from this game, like same engine type of deal. But the point was, their first Metroid entry on the portable console, back on the original Game Boy, not even Game Boy Color, was Metroid 2, The Return of Samus. And that game was very linear, but by design, because the issue with a portable console was that you could be using it at any time and then have to drop it at any time, because you'd be going somewhere and you'd arrive at your destination, or you'd be waiting for something, and then, you know, it'd be done, it'd be over, what have you. And the trouble was, if they just maintained the kind of open nature that Metroid games on the home consoles had, it would be very easy for you to not realize where you were, what you were doing last time you were playing, or where you were going. I mean, especially because the presumption was that if you're playing it on a portable console, you're probably playing it only in those instances where you don't have access to a home console, because then why wouldn't you just use the home console? So if it took a while for you to get out of the house again, so to speak, you might end up finding yourself not touching the Game Boy version for a while. So the linearity helped keep the player on track. This game has a lot of linearity to it, but especially towards the end, a lot of the map opens up for secrets, collectibles, and so forth and so on, because that's the thing, Metroid 2 didn't have a 100% item collection, because certain items, like your beam pickups, would actually regenerate, and you could, like, max out Samus's abilities, and there would still be items to collect, so there wasn't an item collection thing. You basically just had completion time as a factor. And I mean, that was the case in the original Metroid. This convention of items percentage in addition to completion time started with Super Metroid, which Metroid Fusion and Zero Mission and all the subsequent games, including Prime and so forth, came after. Although an interesting note with Prime was that it went in the opposite direction, where completion time, as I understand it, wasn't a factor. I mean, it's still recorded for everybody to gawk at how long it took for you to complete the game. But the thing for the best ending was just the item collection, instead of the timing. And that makes sense because Metroid Prime, to avoid the stigma associated with, like, violent shooters, or because Nintendo was a family console company, they called it a first-person exploration. Not a shooter, it was an exploration. Of course, that led to the scanner becoming this thing that, you want to scan everything, because you might identify where secrets are hidden or whatever, but the scan is not just point at something and get, like, a text box. You have to actually lock onto it and scan it, and it's just annoying, and it takes up a lot of time, which is why in later installments it became substantially less important. But again, if you're going to have an exploration game, you can't really criticize the player for taking their time, because that is exploration. Taking your time. I mean, a straight shot to the end would be quickest, but then you're not exploring anything, so what's the point? So this game went a different route where, to help further guide the player in terms of what they're supposed to do, we have these navigation rooms. Now, every time you have a new objective, it's the ship's computer that explains it to you. However, in addition to that, you can always return to these rooms in order to have your objective restated. This also has a complex map, which became par for the course for the Metroid games, which, as it just did, indicates precisely where you're supposed to go. Now, there might be intervening objectives that you're supposed to complete on the way there, but the game kind of holds your hand, and I think that's part of the reason why people were like, just, nah, man, we're fine. We're about to head out. Now, Metroid Zero Mission, which admittedly was better than this, because, I mean, Metroid Zero Mission, I think, competes with Super Metroid in terms of best in the series. I mean, I feel like... Oh, I can't choose a favorite between the two of those. Super Metroid and Zero Mission are both just fantastic. But the thing is, there's a reason why that comparison perhaps exists, because Super Metroid is chronologically taking place after the events of 1, 2, the Prime series, but it felt a lot like Super Castlevania 4, where it was kind of a remake of the original in the series. Basically, Super Metroid felt like you were playing Metroid again. You were fighting the same bosses, Kraid and Ridley. I mean, with the addition of Phantoon and Dragoon or Dragon or whatever it was supposed to be. And you fight Mother Brain, and it's effectively an expanded version of the same map, you know. It even has an old Turian, a new Turian. I think old Turian is technically part of... Was it Criteria or Rinst? I don't know. But the point is that... So of course the two of them are going to be very similar because they're both quality pieces. They both follow very similar thematic things. But Fusion here was an attempt at going a very different direction with the thing. I mean, Samus has got a new suit. There's a new enemy. Instead of Metroids or even space pirates, per se, we have the parasitic X-Parasite, which would be revisited in Metroid Dread. I do hope I'm remembering the name correctly. And I mean, the funny part, of course, is that AM2R in particular, and I mean, there was probably illusions dropped in Samus Returns, the official Nintendo version. At least I would hope that they dropped illusions now that, like, it was being made as a prequel to this. That the Metroids were created as a bioweapon by the Chozo, specifically to combat the X-Parasites when the Chozo encountered them, because they determined correctly that the X-Parasites were basically the biggest threat to the life in the galaxy. It's also funny that they're very similar to the creatures in John Carpenter's The Thing, to the extent that they can imitate other life forms almost perfectly, possibly perfectly. They can even incorporate their memories. Because yeah, Samus's ability to grab onto ledges was introduced in this game, and the idea behind her being able to do that was the fact that her suit was much more flexible and much lighter than its previous incarnations. That's why they introduced Power Grip in Zero Mission as a way of hand-waving how she could grab ledges in that game, built from the engine of this game, despite wearing her full power suit. So yes, like I said, the text scroll is going to be a little slow in this part because I just let it play out, but after finding out that 25 minutes or so of this footage must, by the fundamental nature of the fact that the game only clocked 11 minutes of play, is literally text scroll. Now, again, it'll become less of an issue later because there's less exposition. This game front-loads a lot of its exposition like stereotypically Japanese story-driven works. But again, that's another weird Metroid thing, is that Metroid has a lot of lore and so forth, but a lot of it was manual stuff. If you didn't read the manual, you didn't get the lore. And a lot of it was environmental or logs in the Prime series. It was never sort of in your face like this, where it's like, this is who you are, this is where you are, this is what you're doing, and in 5 minutes we'll have more information for you, stay tuned. But the reason why I didn't want to leave this installment out, and anybody who thinks that I maybe didn't get to it because I didn't like it, this was the first Metroid game that I played. Because before I had any of the other Metroid titles, a friend let me borrow this, and I played it through to the end, and of course I didn't get 100% of the items, I didn't get 100% completion, because this was early days for the internet, and I didn't really have a computer that could do that, so there were no guides. I basically just played it as one would. So, the footage you're watching is essentially me playing while me also playing. The edited version of the playthrough when I read the guides is running in the background. And of course I'm recording it now, so we have so many layers of, you know, overlapping Now, barring any serious unfortunate problems, 100% of the items is virtually guaranteed in this. My hope, of course, is that timing-wise, this happens the way it's supposed to. Because, like I said, I have to do this in bits now to actually make, like, a release schedule work. Because if you're watching this on the day it airs, this audio is being recorded only a few hours earlier in the morning. When I first played through Metroid 2, I didn't even encounter this thing. Because yes, this is a Metroid 2 enemy. This is what gives you your... I mean, in this game it gives you the Morph Ball, but in that game it gave you the Morph Ball jump, which was technically called the Spring Ball. That would be revisited in Super Metroid. I think here and in Zero Mission, it just got bundled with your high jump. Your high jump is what gave you your Morph Ball jump. Which makes sense. It's kind of an underwhelming power-up when you think about it as... literally, you can just jump it as a Morph Ball. Higher than usual, but in most circumstances, you don't even need that if you have a ledge grab, because you can ledge grab and morph into a Morph Ball, like there, straight away. So why not just use the basic high jump? If you can Morph Ball jump in a space, then it has the vertical clearance for Samus to unmorph. Morph Ball jump is very good for speedrunning, though, because Samus tends to move faster, a little bit in most of the games when she's in her Morph Ball form. And basically by staying in that, by having the ability to cover obstacles that have verticality in that form, you can really go fast. So, a quick recount if you have been listening to me, because you're playing this in the background. I promise I won't hold it against you. So the plot here is that, for some reason, the Federation still has interest in SR-388, even though Samus, allegedly, destroyed all the Metroids on the planet. I mean, there are red flags for something later, but that's spoiler territory. It's basically like, why is the Federation so interested in SR-388? Its main thing was the fact that it was a perfect breeding and mutation environment for Metroids. So Samus goes down there escorting a bunch of biologic space lab research guys and gets attacked by, I think it's called like a Hornode, like a toad or something. And the thing, after it dies, morphs into a gelatinous blob and basically is impervious to attack and then gloms her. She gets infected. Her ship crashes, sad face. They pull her out of an escape pod that auto-ejected, surgically remove chunks of her suit, and the problem is she's infected. So they develop a cure from a culture sample, big air quotes on that, from the infant Metroid, the one from Super Metroid, and the one that she found at the end of Metroid 2. So this mutates Samus, which would also lead to the so-called Metroid armor, or Metroid Samus, in Metroid Dread. And now she is basically the only thing immune to the X-Parasite's influence, because Metroids are somehow capable of not being consumed by the X-Parasites, and quite the contrary, they eat X-Parasites quite freely. This is all very important because of this next beat. There goes Samus. Here comes Samus. But something's not quite right. So after Samus was cured, her suit parts that had been contaminated were sent to this research station. And there was an explosion soon thereafter. And the ship's computer in the next dialogue section is going to elaborate on... well, not in the next dialogue section, it'll be in the next area, but... yes, things are afoot. And that's one of the benefits of this having more story. There's a lot more intricacy about the Galactic Federation and perhaps some of their shady business. The only other time we'd really get that in this series was Metroid Other M, but the less said about Other M, the better. I mean, on paper, gameplay-wise, it made perfect sense. Like, Metroid used to be a 2D, side-scrolling, effectively, game. So, rather than Metroid Prime's first-person perspective, why not have the kind of 3D game by using fixed perspective cameras or on-rails cameras and having Samus move through the environment in a three-dimensional environment? It was much more callback to the original Metroid series than Prime was. The problem was the story. Samus is a relatively fearless, consummate badass. And that was not how she was depicted in Other M. And the story excused for perhaps, for this unusual personality shift was the fact that this was right after Super Metroid and the baby had died. Which, okay, I mean, that's just not very well thought about, I think. And I think a lot of people agree that that was a bit weird. I mean, she becomes so panicked upon encountering it's not even Ridley, it's another member of Ridley's species, that her power suit, like, disapparates. Samus has beaten Ridley at that point, especially with, like, the Prime series included, like, a half a dozen times. Ridley holds no real wow factor for her anymore, and this isn't even Ridley. This isn't the leader of the Space Pirates, this is just another member of the same species. A completely different thing. And yet she freaks. She freaks and loses her suit. And then, of course, they make her subordinate to this guy, this Adam Malkovich, who immediately is like, we hereby restrict you from using the full abilities of your suit because it's too dangerous. And it's like, Samus in this game, which came out long before that, even said right out that she dislikes having to follow orders. Now, they do imply that despite this, she still does follow orders, but there is a point in that game, and I haven't played that game because I know that it's garbage, because everybody basically pointed out that it's garbage. There was a mod for it that was made that greatly reduced dialogue and cutscenes to, like, bare bones, and changed other aspects, like when you get the gravity ability restored, her suit actually turns purple, like it's supposed to. I mean, we can blame Prime for the orange suit becoming Samus's standard look, because at that point, at that time, the gravity suit was a Super Metroid thing, and the Prime series takes place between 2 and Super Metroid, so she wouldn't have encountered the gravity suit. But the thing is, they include a gravity power-up in, I think, at least 2 out of the 3 Prime games, so why not just give her a gravity suit? Why not just make the suit... I mean, the purple suit was killing it, but now everybody just has it in their head that Samus' standard look is orange. Many layers of questionable... there. So yeah, somebody modded it to make it less terrible, and funny part, all they really needed to do there was to cut out the part where Samus is beholden to some Federation father figure, question mark? Again, father figure in the Federation. She was, lore-wise, she was raised by, like, 2 Chozo. She has father figures. Why, I mean, is the argument that because Adam's a human, like Samus, that somehow resonates more with her? That's, like I said, so many layers of questionable writing choice. And that's the thing. I mean, perhaps you disagree with my assessment and many people's assessment of Metroid Other M. The reality of the matter is, however, is that it was so bad, it put Metroid in a coma for like 7 years. So, you might, if you like that game, you might fall into a rare group of people. I'd also wager that your first experience with the game was probably either Prime or Other M, because you wouldn't be aware of what was wrong with Other M unless you had played a previous Metroid game, like 1 through 3, or, and by 3 I do mean Super Metroid, or the Prime series even, because she doesn't really talk in the Prime series. That's the thing, Samus embodies the strong silent type. She's a woman of action. as opposed to being a person of words, and that's one of the things that makes her a very cool, you know, unflappable, or I think it's meant to be pronounced unflappable character. That was not the Samus we saw in Other M. And I get the cool and unflappable maybe isn't all that dramatically deep or interesting, but it's her character. It's her established character. You know, if you actually wanted to do a stint of, like, young Samus before she got her sea legs and had, you know, saved the galaxy several times over, then do that story. But then you can't cash in on all the sort of fan things about, like, oh, well, I remember that from this game, and oh, I remember that from this game. You can't really do that with a prequel. You need a sequel for that. So we get the charge beam ability back. Huzzah. Yes, our missile power-ups we got from a downloading terminal, but we only get, I think, 4, maybe 5 power-ups from download. The rest we get by absorbing those special core X parasites. But no, because the time here is winding down, I'd like to point out that part of the reason why this was so difficult for me to get that 100% completion in the completion time is because this is probably one of the harder titles to actually make that achievement in. You have to be damn efficient in your run through the game in order to get all the stuff and do it quickly. I mean, Super Metroid's relatively lenient in this regard, because rather than a 2-hour completion time, it has a 3-hour completion time for the best end. And in my recording of it, I did not make 2 hours. I made, like, I want to say 2:10, 2:20, but yeah, no, I still made the best completion time, because I wanted to have the playlist basically just say in under 2 hours, but I couldn't do that because of Super Metroid. So it became 100% of the items in the best completion time. Bip bop boom. Yeah, we got a thing here that we get from a wall jump. And I saved because if I screw this up, because my controller's D-pad's kinda shit. It tends to want to diagonal a lot, so if you see Samus, like, suddenly pointing in a diagonal, that's because I'm holding left or right. But if my finger is not perfectly in that position, it tends to want to drift the controller input into diagonal up or diagonal down. It's a problem, but I don't have another controller that will work. I had 3 controls. Actually, I had 4 controls. 3 of them are now broken. Some fell, some were kept under heavy items and busted, and others just wore out. I mean, they have mechanical internal assemblies that wear through use. So yes, this run sadly ended up more cursed than my Super Metroid run, which I had to re-record 3 times because of technical issues. I mean, here I am. This isn't even... Arguably, would it be a Let's Play if I post-record the audio? On an interesting tangent, that is sort of how I had intended to do my channel from the start. I just never had the time for that. Because my mindset was that when you're LPing, your brain is being split. It's a bit akin to when you're quiet. It's a bit akin to when you're tired and part of your brain shuts off. So either your gameplay suffers, or your dialogue, what you're saying, suffers, or they both suffer if you're really unlucky. Now, maybe that's part of the reason people come in, to watch somebody look stupid in front of millions of other people. You're lucky if you have millions of people watching in the first place. But I had thought that I could up the quality of my LPs by focusing entirely on the gameplay, and then going in after the fact and focusing entirely on the audio recording. This is probably the most consistent audio recording that I've done in a recent series of LPs, because I have nothing else to do but to continue spooling out stuff, since I'm not actually playing right now. The issue, of course, is that, again, this is taking an enormous amount of time to put together, and if I'm going to produce regular content, I can't afford to do that. And besides which, again, some people would say it's not a real LP, because the audio wasn't recorded while you were playing. It's a post-recording. But for this game, at least, this became a necessity because of the technical issue, because I needed that focus, that laser focus. And I was already splitting my attention, because I have to keep looking over at the side to another screen to watch my other recording of when I was doing this before. Oh, big reveal here. So because Samus was infected, the X sampled her DNA and replicated her inside of the pieces of her suit. So the X basically cloned Samus, and now there's an S version of her going about the station. It blew up the quarantine bay with a power bomb and has been spreading the rest of the X ever since. Like I said, big reveal. So yeah, I had the guide open on one end, and I had the previous video footage opened on the other, and I had to play this, and I had re-watched the footage before I started playing while I had it in the background, because again, I have to hit the collectibles in an extremely linear... I basically have to provide this with the sort of focus that you'd get out of a speed runner. Now, this isn't going to be a speed run, far from it. But I needed that level of focus in order to make it work, to get the items and get that completion time. And I've cleared the, like, hub area and our first trip to the SRX region, and I did it in under 11 minutes of game time. So I'm on the right track. I can feel fairly confident that I'll make that under 2-hour mark. But again, it leads to this odd thing where I'm post-recording my audio instead of recording it actively. So yes, as a side effect of our Metroid vaccine, we are vulnerable to cold. We can be frozen. And because the SAX is imitating us at full power, it has the Ice Beam. I find it interesting in so many Metroid games that Samus inexplicably loses all of her gear, or at least most of her gear, and yet the SAX imitates her from a trip when she was just slumming it with some Federation scientists, and yet it has the Ice Beam, probably her most powerful weapon, particularly considering it's one of the few things that Metroids are vulnerable to, at least in their larval state. Because as we all know, once they get bigger, it's missiles they're vulnerable to. Except in this game. That's spoiler territory again. Kinda showed my hand a little bit, but it's fine. Now this zone, I'm probably going to bring it up in the next video because I'm about out of time, but this zone is a maze, and usually when I lose time in these playthroughs, it's trying to navigate this mess, either because I miss an item or I take a wrong path. The tropical habitat always messes with me. Well, since this is post-recording and I know my time's running up, I'll see you in the next video.